Welcome, everyone. My name is Susan Hearn, CEO of Germane Solutions, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, Maximizing GME Funding, the Essential Role of Administrators in Reporting and Compliance. We're so excited to continue this important discussion as we present Part 2 today. Whether you're returning from Part 1 or joining us for the first time, thank you for being here. As a brief refresher, Part 1 focused on foundational knowledge and strategies for effective reporting and compliance, laying the groundwork for strong GME financial practices. In Part 2, we'll dive deeper into commonly unseen RMS reporting issues and recommendations for proper oversight and monitoring. Together, these sessions are designed to equip you with the knowledge and tools you need to maximize your institution's GME funding. For the series, we developed 4 objectives. The first 2 here listed on the document, we've satisfied in Part 1, understanding how accurate reporting directly impacts GME funding, and discussing complex concepts such as CAP versus count, RMS to IRIS, and IRIS to MCR. In today's webinar, participants will learn how to avoid some of the most common and costly pitfalls in GME reporting and gain exposure to tools to work more effectively with your institution's finance team. Before I introduce today's speakers, there are a few administrative items to note. Participants have been muted upon entry to the session. If for any reason your audio is showing as unmuted, please mute yourself to eliminate background noise during the presentation. We've made every effort to reduce technical issues on the webinar. However, if you have any problems, please indicate them to Hunter Rich in a private chat on the platform. The slide presentation and the webinar broadcast are provided exclusively for the use of registrants and should not be shared. Reproducing, distributing, or transmitting any session materials or the live presentation to any other group or individual requires express permission from Germane Solutions. If you have questions throughout the session, please submit them in the chat feature. We'll be answering questions as they come up, as well as during a dedicated question and answer time at the end of the session. If we're not able to get to all the questions in the allotted time, or if you have a question you don't want to include through the public method, you have the opportunity to submit them via email after the session. Lastly, every registered participant for today's session will receive an email containing a link to our survey so we can obtain feedback about today's webinar. The survey is brief and we encourage your comments. Now let me introduce our speakers. Kyle Knepper, Senior Manager, and Margot Flowers, Senior Consultant. Kyle Knepper leads Germane Solutions Operations Service Line, and he has a focus on strategy, technology, and innovation in GME. He partners with institutions to streamline daily processes, enhance ACGME compliance, and build efficient learner-centered environments that support sustainable growth. With over 9 years at Germane Solutions, Kyle brings deep expertise in aligning operations with educational and financial goals. Margot Flowers, our finance service lead, has over 8 years of healthcare experience with a strong focus in GME. As a recognized expert in Medicare cost reporting, IRIS data management, and reimbursement strategy, Margot helps institutions maximize funding through accurate, compliant reporting. Her leadership in the finance service line ensures clients receive expert guidance rooted in both regulatory knowledge and real-world application. Now let me turn the session over to our speakers. Kyle, you can begin.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. And welcome, everyone. Hopefully, most of you found value in the first part of this series. But I do, if we do have any new folks that joined, I just want to spend, since it was a couple weeks ago, just a couple quick minutes, kind of refreshing us all on what was discussed and what were some of the highlights. So, again, the first part was primarily around creating, providing some education and creating that foundational platform in which we can start kind of talking about some of the more nuances in terms of reporting and compliance, and how those will ultimately affect reimbursement. And so just kind of revisiting some of the topics that were discussed in the first part. Largely, we spent time discussing the components of reimbursement, IME, DGME, and capital IME, and how those rates are kind of calculated. We discussed the importance of CAP and how that relationship with your resident and fellow counts directly impacts the amount of dollars that you're able to generate through the Medicare program. We also highlighted a number of situations that you need to be aware of in terms of what resident activity can be counted and what can't be counted. And then we also spent some time really focusing on more of the process and the relationships between the finance team and the GME office and how critical those are in terms of kind of taking, GME scheduling information and documentation all the way through to the IRIS reports and ultimately on the cost report for reimbursement. So, and again, a lot of the topics we just want to highlight here are centered largely around the federal reimbursement. CAP that's largely where the term CAP comes from, is through the Medicare program. But we recognize that a lot of GME reimbursement is also coming through other mechanisms, through grants, also through the state Medicaid programs. And oftentimes the state Medicaid programs are not capped. And so as we kind of go through this process, we just don't want you to forget that, we often hear that organizations will say, well, our health system or our hospital is way over our cap. So, for us to go through the exercise of really making sure that we're capturing another handful of FTEs really doesn't really result in financial value. That is true on the federal side and through the Medicare side because of the limitations of cap. But a lot of states out there like Texas and Florida as an example, you really want to try to put as big a number on that report as possible, because you do get funding for every FTE you contribute training to. So again, this hopefully throughout this part of the series, these will be some helpful hints that will help you maybe capture a few more of those FTEs that you're already training and get some financial value for. All right, so that's a quick refresher on the prior session. This session again is primarily targeted towards digging more into the specifics of the RMS platforms, documentation in those platforms, and ultimately how that then translates to the IRIS reports for reimbursement. So we'll just spend a quick minute kind of highlighting the commonly used tools, or like the out of box, or the out of the box reports that most people are familiar with. And then what we want to do is, after working with a number of health systems and institutions across the country, these are, as we kind of dig in deep, here's a number of things that we call kind of unseen or hidden issues that don't, there is no indicator or report that tells you that this is something that should be reviewed or revisited. This is kind of something that we've learned along the way, and we hope to share that with you or share some of those examples. Again, for those that are familiar or maybe not familiar, there are a number of kind of tools and reports that are available in your RMS platforms. They might have different names, but these are kind of the names that are generically used. And the first, there's four main ones here. The first one is, the demographics report, which is really an opportunity to pull a report down of all the learners, residents, fellows, and kind of understand what gaps are in their profiles. Like maybe there's a medical school that's missing, or their graduation dates, or there's a number of things that might be missing, or that might not, you might have onboarded the learner, but they didn't have certain information available right away, and then it never got populated. Again, if there's any of those gaps within their profiles, that will limit them from showing up on the IRIS report. So this is a great tool to kind of identify what gaps are still out there, and then obviously gives you time to address them and resolve them. The next two reports, the gap locator and then the overlap report, those are very common and critically important. I mean, the gap locator or gap report is really, obviously does what it says. It identifies all the gaps in a trainee's record. So in the event that there is a month rotation that maybe they did an away rotation at a different hospital, and for whatever reason you didn't account for that, even though you felt like, hey, I can't claim that time, or at least I can't claim most of it, you still want to make sure that there's at least a rotation in there that's configured that does, maybe you can't count that activity, but at least it's identifying that the resident's doing something else during that period of time. The overlap report is mainly driven by, we want to make sure that we're not overcounting resident activity. Oftentimes residents will have multiple rotations scheduled over the same times and different things like that, and then that will ultimately equate to more than a 1.0 FTE. And we certainly don't want to overclaim that time, in large part due to, you don't want to have to go back and, if there's an audit done or anything like that, have to make adjustments, or you don't want to be overpaid and then have to pay that money back. So it's good to get those cleaned up early as well. And then the last one is kind of a catch-all, often called the error report. And again, that's a great way of, again, identifying any kind of missing information relative to a resident or a rotation that's being used by the residents. So those are kind of very helpful reports and kind of standard. Many of you might be familiar with them already, but there are a certain number of things that we wanted that these reports just don't catch. And we're going to kind of go through a few of those here. Sorry, kind of rolling around here. The first one is just the actual configuration of the rotations that are being used. So again, what I mean by that is, in the event that a resident is doing an inpatient wards rotation or something like that, and they're spending 100% of their time during those 4 weeks, in the hospital, you would just set up that rotation and 100% of their time would be claimed by that hospital that they're training in. That's pretty common, but there are situations, obviously where residents are splitting their time across multiple sites. And we just want to make sure that the rotations are configured as such and that they're actually reflective of the residents' time between those sites. Oftentimes, we're kind of painting with broad strokes with these configurations, because oftentimes you're using one rotation and applying that to every resident that's on that rotation. But there, again, will always be situations where one resident's experience isn't necessarily the same as every other resident's experience. And when you are starting to kind of split your time out between different locations, it can vary a little bit. And so there are certain protocols that are designed to kind of account for that. Again, percentage protocol is kind of the most basic version of this, which we'll kind of look at more closely here in a second. Like I said, if you're splitting your time, if the resident's truly splitting their time between two sites, evenly, you would hope to have math or some type of context to demonstrate that on a daily level. But you would set up that particular rotation 50% at one hospital, 50% at the other. There are situations though where maybe, again, I go back to the residents that are rotating to other hospitals, but they are coming back for increments of time, like a daily assignment or like a clinic rotation per se. And it's not consistent. Maybe they come back and do 2 clinic sessions in a week or 1, and it's a little bit variable. You can use those assignments with the percentage protocol to better kind of divvy up that time across multiple sites. And then the third category or third option is kind of the work hour configuration. Again, I've seen this used to varying levels of success. It's largely driven by not how you set up the rotation, but it's driven by the resident and their experience. In theory, it sounds great because you're saying, well, then we don't have to paint with broad strokes. We literally use whatever the resident tells us in their work hours. They're going to tell us on their timesheets basically where they were and how they spent their week. Unfortunately, we all know residents are not the most diligent in getting that time submitted, number one, and number two, because there's sometimes delays and things of that nature, or haste to get it done. How accurate is it really at the end of the day? And because their input is really translating to real dollars for the hospital. It's hard to really coach them up in a way that you have a lot of success. But again, I've seen it done to varying levels of success, and just knowing that that's an option, you can lean into it. I kind of described verbally, but this is more of a visual of kind of these different protocols. The percentage protocol, these are 3 different examples of kind of showing you that, how you can set up these rotations 100% at one site, split the time between 2 sites, or even you can split that time between 3 sites. I realize that there's an error. It should be, oh no, it's not an error. But anyways, again, this is really important to, number one, get it in there, but it's number 2 to get it done accurately. And one of the things we just want to highlight here is it's one thing to do it. It's another thing to make sure that you're keeping a close eye on it. We regularly work with clients that, certain clinical capabilities or clinical volumes are changing at a particular hospital that they use for certain rotations. Maybe say it's for deliveries or for surgical procedures or something like that. And for whatever reason, the volumes at that site have declined over time. And they've actually then, to satisfy the educational needs of the learners, they've decided to move that rotation to a different site or split it between 2 sites. And so, those are changes where you want to make sure that the program might be the program director or the core faculty member who's leading that rotation, they might be making those decisions for the interest of the learner, but it might not be communicated and then implemented at the administrative level. So we highly encourage administrators around the programs to at least annually before the start of every academic year, really go back and revisit every rotation and its configuration with the attendings and the program leadership, just to kind of make sure that what's currently set up is still true. So digging a little bit more into the percentage protocol while also using the assignment definitions or the daily assignments, however you want to phrase that. What we just want to kind of give a couple examples if you don't use these, why you might want to use these. One of the best ways is that again, a lot of programs and institutions paint with broad strokes, and I think as you're looking to make sure that you get credit for all the time that the resident's actually spending at your site versus another site. One really good example would be if you are a resident is actually, they're doing an away rotation in another hospital. You might have traditionally set that rotation up as 100% of the time the resident's spending at the other hospital, but in reality, the resident is often coming back for a variety of clinical and non-clinical experiences, maybe during that week or during that month. Maybe they do noon conference every day for an hour, or maybe they come back and do their continuity clinics or something like that for a 1/2 day a week. It's fine to set up that rotation as, when they're on this rotation, they're away 100% of the time is at this other hospital, but there are small increments of time throughout the week or throughout the rotation that they're coming back to our parent site, and we want to quantify and we want to capture. And when you do that, the way that the system, if you're unfamiliar with the way the IRIS calculation works, is that it always is going to look for daily assignments first. And it's going to look to say, well, how are those daily assignments? Like, what's the duration of those assignments? Let's just say it's a 4-hour clinic session. And then where is it configured? It's then going to allocate that proportional amount of time to that provider that's going to claim that time. And then whatever's left over, it will then default back. It will then distribute the remaining amount to whatever the parent rotation is configured as. So again, that's just a really nice way if you're familiar and your hospital has available cap and you know that your residents are doing out rotations, but you know that they're also spending some of their time kind of coming back for smaller clinical commitments. I think it's a great way to kind of reevaluate that and carve out some of those pieces of time so that you get at least some credit for it. And if you have available cap, you obviously get reimbursed for that time. So, okay, so that's the first kind of hidden thing that I think a lot of health systems could improve and really lean into when it comes to just the configuration of the rotations, and then keeping a close eye and monitoring those configurations and making sure that they're accurate. The next one that we want to kind of talk about is and this is from New Innovations, but MedHub I think has similar structures, but some organizations we see, or some programs we'll see, where the administrator will for whatever reason schedule 2 rotational assignments at the same time. And so what this example we're showing here is that there's 2 rotations. Well, one starting in October or starting at the beginning of October and ending at the end of October. But only one of the rotations is actually identified as the primary rotation. And that's really important. Again, we recognize that there's always this kind of this dance of, making sure that your resident management software is capturing all of the educational elements so that you can if you need to pull a report of some sort and communicate that to the ACGME, you have that information. But then obviously there's the finance side of things for capturing the residents' time and where are they and things like that for IRIS reporting. And so in this particular program, they were doubling up rotations because they wanted to make sure that if they needed to, they could show how the resident was they were doing multiple educational experiences during this 1 month time. The problem is that when you dig into the detail of these rotations, you can see that the top rotation, which was identified as the primary rotation, was configured to two different hospitals, 80% at one, 20% at the other. And then you look at the second rotation here, the 100% of that rotation was configured to a third hospital. Now, when it comes to iris reporting, it's only going to look at the primary rotation. So no matter what you set up the secondary or non-primary rotation, no matter what you set it up as, there will be no credit or given to that facility in terms of the resident's time. And so to avoid this situation, what we would just recommend is to consolidate this into one rotation, and obviously configure it across the 3 different sites, and then also lean in, or the alternative is to lean into the assignment scheduling, which is to say we're going to set up one rotation and configure it to one site, and then for all of those different increments of time that the resident is spending at those other 2 sites, we would identify that in those daily assignments and configure those as such. So again, this is often a challenge for programs, and I think it seems to be really common with procedural-based specialties or specialties where residents are kind of tasked with kind of chasing volume across multiple sites. So just kind of getting a handle on that, I think, is really important. Okay, so we've talked about rotation configurations. We've talked about primary rotations and kind of the unknown nature of that in terms of how it affects iris calculations. We also want to talk about the kind of this generic elective rotation, or sometimes they're called placeholders. Oftentimes what we'll see when working with programs is that there's a number of, within a program, they'll have a rotation that, as in this example, it's a surgery program that just has surgery elective. And that rotation will be configured for the main hospital that they're currently rotating through. But the reality is that each resident might actually choose a different experience during that elective rotation. And that experience might also not be at the main hospital, or at least be split between the main hospital and somewhere else. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that these elective rotations are at least actively being reviewed. And personally, best practice for Germane when we're working with these clients is to actually never configure these elective rotations at all, and to truly treat them as placeholders. And then what we ultimately suggest is that once the resident has chosen what exactly they want their experience to be and where they plan on spending that time, you either create a customized rotation for that learner with the appropriate iris configuration, or you have a list of 5, 6, 7, 8 elective rotations, and they're set up, they're pre-configured. And then once the residents have made those selections from kind of that limited list of opportunities, then you would just swap that blank elective out with their selected one. Again, that's best practice for Germane, and we just feel like that's oftentimes residents are being overcounted. And then what ultimately ends up happening is when these residents are doing electives, away from the main hospital, but then they're from a scheduling standpoint, they're being claimed by the main hospital. There's often overlap. The other hospital is claiming that time, you're claiming that time, and then CMS comes along, does their audit, and they present both parties with saying, hey, you're both claiming this residence time for the same month. The 2 of you need to figure out what's going on. It typically those audits aren't happening until a year or 2 later. Maybe there's turnover in leadership or turnover in administrative staff. And now it's kind of a rat's nest to try to figure out what exactly happened here. And so that's another way of losing out on reimbursement, because the CMS will sit there and say, well, if the 2 of you can't come to an agreement or figure this out, neither of you get the reimbursement. And so that's, again, these are situations that we're hoping or trying to help organizations avoid. Kind of the final one here that we really want to kind of highlight, and then we can start to open this up for questions if need be, but is really the inbound rotators. There's certainly in the world of GME, very few facilities have all of the clinical resources in-house to meet the needs of the learner. So it's common for these learners to kind of be rotating to other hospitals that they don't maybe share a governance structure with, and different things like that. And one of the things, for an organization that does have inbound learners, it's really important that you have a good process for capturing these learners, the learner detail. And so again, we're very, every organization, every program that rotates residents in or out, there's a PLA process, and which is, you know, regularly followed purely for compliance reasons. And within the PLAs, it has enough detail to say, hey, this organization or this program is going to be sending, a handful of residents for 1 month at a time to our facility, during this academic period. That detail's in there. But what's not provided is the actual granular detail. Well, which learner is it? What time of the year did they come? And so, capturing that once the learners start coming, that can be a little bit more challenging. And oftentimes organizations will say, well, I didn't even know that learner was here when they said that they were. So I know that hopefully those issues are few and far between, but it does happen. And so what we feel like is really important, if you don't already have kind of a robust process or an intake form for these learners, that you develop one, and you want to have a form that obviously is capturing all the necessary information that's needed for them to fill out their demographics, their required demographics, so that they end up on the IRIS report. Again, if you have any gaps on this list, that could be problematic, and could be hard to track down, especially if it's a resident that's graduating, and again, turnover in administrative staff. One of the things that we always try to recommend is that you kind of have a hard stance with these inbound learners, that none of these inbound, that you work with your credentialing office and different things like that to basically put a hold on any inbound rotators. They're not permitted to train or come on site until they have these intake forms fully completed and submitted. That way you're not trying to track down this information after the fact. Couple things that we want to highlight here that's important in this intake form is, number one, the program's original, the program that this inbound rotator is coming from. When did this program come online, or when did it originally become accredited? The reason why that's so important is because in today's world, GME world, there are a number of hospitals, even if they're like legacy teaching hospitals that have been around for decades, that have explored or leveraged things called rule designation and other things of the sort. Which basically means that they can continue to develop CAP when residents from new programs rotate to them. And what we mean by a new program is any program that is in the first 5 years of training residents. And so the original accreditation date won't give you an immediate indicator of, yep, this program's new, or it's fully mature, it's, or 6 years or older. But what it is going to do is it's going to kind of at least give you that early kind of insight to say, okay, well, if this program was accredited in 2020, it's worth following up and asking the question to say, well, when was the first class of residents or fellows? When did they start with this program? And again, if they're new and your hospital is eligible to develop CAP, you want to make sure that you identify these learners as such so that they can get properly reported, and you get CAP in perpetuity from them being there. And that's only opens the door for more reimbursement, more opportunity for you all and your hospitals moving forward. So that's a really good one just to kind of highlight and be familiar with, because new residents do need to be reported on different lines, and they need to be flagged as such on the cost report. The other thing that we want to highlight too is, again, there are certain programs that are very rigid, and when they're on this rotation, they always train here, and they're there Monday through Sunday, however many hours a week, and there's not really much variability there. But there are a number of programs that, again, are kind of procedural based. The cases are kind of fluid in terms of which ones they're participating in. They might be rotating across couple different hospitals. I worked with a physical medicine and rehab program on the East Coast, and they literally, there was no predictive nature on when they would be rotating or when they would be coming to each hospital. It was really just kind of, they would only know a couple weeks in advance, where they would be. And so when that happens, and there's a lot of fluidity and uncertainty, we also believe it's in the best interest of the receiving hospital to ask the residents to fill out a timesheet. And so even though they're doing work hours in their own RMS platform, it's really important that they fill out a timesheet for that 4-week rotation that they're coming to your hospital, so that they can tell you, hey, I ended up spending Monday and Tuesday at your hospital doing cases. I came back the following week. It was Wednesday and Thursday. And really then what you do with that information is that you then create a custom rotation that, you do some back of the envelope math and you come up with a percentage distribution of how much time you feel like during that 4-week period you have the right to claim. The beauty of having them fill out the timesheet is that that's kind of their attestation or their sign off on what's accurate and true. Again, what you don't want to happen is 2 years down the road you get audited and you're told by CMS that you're claiming the same full month that another hospital is claiming, and then the two of you have to figure out how you're going to divide that time and come up with a solution. What you can then do in that situation is present them with these timesheets and say, this is why we claim that amount of time. This is literally the resident telling us that. And so, again, I think it's just a great, opportunity to kind of have that documentation and leverage it in a meaningful way for your hospital. Again, this is just a slide that we wanted to kind of highlight it again, just kind of further using when it comes to inbound residents or inbound rotators, just, going, even though I didn't want to poo-poo PLAs, I think they're extremely valuable, but I think you can also leverage information from there to say, hey, as we kind of close out our academic year or close out our fiscal year, go back and look at those PLAs and look and say, well, what program said they were going to send residents to us, and kind of compare that, what the PLA said was going to happen versus what you have documented in your RMS platform, and identify where there's gaps. And oftentimes you might find where it's like, okay, well, why do we only have 6 residents a month each when they said they were going to send us 8? Did we not capture those 2, or did they just not send them? So those are, good opportunities to kind of tie up loose ends there. Sometimes you'll find that you'll have a PLA and then you didn't have any residents, capture any residents. And in those situations, those PLAs are at least kind of helping to kind of guide you through what needs to be revisited and addressed, because you want to make sure you're capturing all those. And again, cannot stress enough, it's one thing for your hospital to be over cap and it not, finding these fractional FTEs not be meaningful there. But on a state level, the ability to capture and count those learners and get credit for them is vital. So, and that kind of concludes some of the at least the high level, like the main 4 things that we often look for when we're working with clients and trying to kind of clean up some of their reporting and processes. But to kind of put a bow on that and just summarize it onto one slide, in terms of best practices and things that you need to be focused around. Again, I cannot stress enough, like really making sure that all the providers, or at least hospitals that the residents are rotating through, making sure that their rotations are configured appropriately and are in alignment with what's actually happening. We spoke about electives and placeholders and just kind of making sure that you're approaching those in the right way, and that residents aren't their time when maybe they're not spending 100% of it at your hospital. It's not just defaulting to that. We spoke in the first part of the series about, what can and can't be counted. A lot of programs don't realize that, vacation time or leave of absence, like, maternity leave or paternity leave or anything like that, anything that doesn't extend the training of the resident, is certainly fair game and should be counted, even if they're not clinical. And then we spoke about the importance of understanding the difference between a primary rotation and a non-primary rotation, and how that affects IRIS reporting and calculations. And then we also spoke briefly about kind of, try to avoid as much as possible painting with broad strokes. And in the event that you find situations where residents aren't cleanly splitting their time on a consistent manner between 2 sites, really lean into some of that assignment level detail or daily level detail to kind of help better capture and quantify those FTEs that you can count and that the other hospital will count. So that's a brief summary. I guess, Susan, do you want me to speak to this, or do you or Hunter want to speak to this?
You can give it an intro.
Yeah. So, everything that we've kind of discussed to this point over the last couple sessions, hopefully you've all found it really valuable. Again, when you're knee deep in operations, it's hard to kind of, look to the financial side. But that is obviously the lifeblood of these programs. It's really what kind of helps contribute to the hospitals that support the clinical training. And so that's one of the things we want to offer for those that participated in this session, for you and your organization to kind of reach out to us and just, follow up and if you're interested, and we can kind of help you do a deeper dive so you have a better understanding of, well, what is our reimbursement look like for the FTEs that we have, and where are we relative to our cap, and what kind of things can we do to positively impact that. And so we'd love to continue to have that conversation and get a little bit more customized with and personalized with kind of what your situation is. One of the things we also just want to stress is that there's a ton of other strategies that can be done from a health system perspective, and to kind of move these chess pieces around financially to kind of enhance the overall reimbursement opportunity that GME generates. And so, but you can't implement those strategies until you feel confident that the information coming out of the RMS platform is accurate. So I think that's kind of this is a first step, and then you can kind of just build up from here. So a lot of opportunity, and there's a QR code here. So obviously encourage you all to reach out. And Hunter, who's on this call, will kind of help facilitate a meeting time that we can meet with you. And we encourage you to bring, any kind of leadership that you wish to bring, your director of GME, or maybe your finance person within the GME office, the DIO, certainly, because we want everybody to feel comfortable with kind of what's being discussed and be involved in how to kind of improve it. So.
Great. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
We'll now open the floor for questions from the audience. If you have a question, please type it in the chat box. And we're going to start with one, which is, what are the consequences of inaccurate configuration on the residency management software?
Yeah, I think it's really twofold. The immediate one is obviously if we have the ability to count those residents and get funding, and the configuration's not accurate, and it says that the resident's somewhere else, well, that's real money that we've missed out on. And then number two, I kind of talked about it because I think this is oftentimes the worst part about it, other than losing money, is just the administrative burden. If there's a situation where we're counting a resident and somebody else is counting that same resident, and there's an overlap, CMS is going to come along and do their audits, and they're getting really good at this. And then you have to then now coordinate with that other organization to figure out what is true and what, and then you're going to have to go back, update the RMS platform. You're going to have to regenerate an IRIS report. Then you're going to have to work with the finance team to resubmit the cost. They're going to have to resubmit and amend a cost report. So it's just better to make sure that you're focused on maintaining the accuracy of the information rather than, having to deal with it downstream, because that's a pretty heavy lift. So.
Well, thank you to the presenters for the information and insights provided today. In wrapping up our session, we want to thank you all for participating. As noted earlier, you'll receive an email this afternoon with a short survey to complete, as well as a copy of the presentation. If you have any outstanding questions after today's presentation, please email Hunter Rich at hrich@germane-solutions.com. And we also want to remind you that Germane Solutions is offering that free complimentary 1-hour meeting with our GME finance experts. That includes a 5-year retrospective review of your institution's cost reports, focused on GME-related reporting and compliance. To schedule that, you can scan the QR code here or have your DIO email Hunter, again, hrich@germane-solutions.com, with the subject line, AHME webinar cost report review request. We look forward to hosting more webinars later this year. To be included in any important future announcements, follow Germane Solutions on LinkedIn or contact us on the website. Thank you again for your participation in today's webinar.